All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Poorheads, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa.
And we are finishing up It Came from the Deep month with really where it all started. We've used the phrases blueprint, prototype, all of those things for ones that we've discussed before now. But when it comes down to talking about monsters crawling out of the water and coming to get you, it all comes back to Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I'm going to throw this to Dave first in a section we're calling The Birth of a Water Monster, because always chomping at the bit to discuss a black and white, always chomping at the bit to discuss a universal monster. This one's checking so many boxes. Dave, tell us your Creature from the Black Lagoon story.
Listen, there's something about the creature that just spoke to me. There's something about Gilman that just, like, when I was a kid, I was immediately drawn to that monster. I don't know if it was the poster for the movie, because the poster is incredible with Gilman holding Judy Adams's character Kay as, you know, he dives deep down into the Black Lagoon. I don't know why, but this thing just worked for me. And I saw a lot of these movies on TV, the Universal Monster movies on TV when I was a kid, and I saw them also with my grandfather occasionally, and this one he really, really liked, and maybe that's why I saw this one so often. But because of its connection to Florida, I feel like Florida guys tend to really be into this movie. Florida's
Right.
intimately tied to this movie, and it takes place in Brazil, but a lot of this thing was filmed here in Florida. So I can't say I got to know Riku Browning well. I met him on a handful of occasions at conventions, but I did get to know his grandson fairly well. He was actually my band's manager for a while.
Oh, that's cool.
So Billy, if you're watching this ever, you're awesome. Your grandfather was fucking awesome, and we miss him terribly. So I love this movie. I was commenting to you, Daniel, earlier that I don't think as a child, in my youth, I saw any monster movie quite as much as this one. So it really does occupy a very special place in my heart.
This is one that when I watched it last night, this was the first time I've seen it since I was a kid. I can remember being in like second or third grade and catching this on a Saturday with my mom. I mean, this was a Monster Vision go-to. You know, shout out Joe Bob Briggs for bringing so many of us to where we are now.
Yeah.
If you're of this age, this was one of those ones that you could just count on to be on the television. I had seen this movie once or twice. I mean, probably twice in segments before last night when I sat down and watched it. And I don't have a lot of memories really tied to this one other than remembering watching it with my mom. But I do have an appreciation for everything that it brought forward. So my story is far more modern in the fact that I watched this last night, knowing I'm going into a film. I mean, this thing's what, 54, right? Or it was made in 54, so it is now 70 years old. So whenever we go into one of these Universal monsters, you gotta get in the right mindset. You got to know that this isn't going to be a lot of shock and awe horror. This is going to be a lot of mood horror. This is going to be a lot of fear of the unknown, I think, is where this one really comes in. What some of the connections I started making last night to what I ended up really liking about this is how this is very similar to I love steampunk novels.
Yep.
And it's the same type of thing, kind of reversed. Whereas steampunk was written and it was so often, like with Jules Verne and a lot of them, it was about this westward expansion and the unknown that was here in America as they were pushing left across the map. This takes that and turns it into fear of the unknown in these areas that are untouched since the birth of time. One of the absolute fucking standout things from this movie is the intro scene from this movie.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
phenomenal. That great little voiceover that kind of starts off with the verses that sound biblical, and then it gets into the science of the evolution, and they start talking about this land untouched by time. And I think that that's a really lush area to explore with horror that now we don't get into as much without fetishizing it. We get, your Green Infernos, and you go back a little bit further, your Cannibal Holocaust, and we get this idea that the fear there is the people, which is moderately jingoistic at best, right?
Yep.
There are far worse words I could use. I'll stick with that one.
Mhm.
With this movie, it's not about the people that are there that are untouched by time. It's about what nature has done when left untouched. And I loved that. That led into such a great experience for this movie. I ended up really, really enjoying it. While I was never, my heart rate was never that high up, I was never jumping on the couch or anything. This is one of those movies that really does stretch what you can appreciate in horror, both based on the time that it came out and what you're supposed to find scary about it. And I liked that a lot.
What you're supposed to find scary about it, I think, is drastically different from the kind of Universal monster movie that we were accustomed to. Because we've done Frankenstein, we've done The Bride of Frankenstein, we have attempted The Invisible Man. I don't think we've done Dracula, right? No, we haven't done Dracula.
No, we have not done a Universal Dracula yet.
And we haven't done the Wolfman. But if you start looking at this stuff, right? The 30s, the 40s, early 40s, right? We get a very different kind of monster. It's a very gothic monster.
Yes.
But after the birth of the atomic age, we get totally different horror. This is a horror that is no longer the monster lurking in the shadows. This is a monster that is based in science. And this is why we get movies like Tarantula. This is why we get movies like 20,000 it came from 20,000 miles beneath the surface of the earth, whatever the fuck that was called. Like
the one that is a very long version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yes, that, Moon Men from Mars, all of these movies, the ones that really Harryhausen becomes really big in these times, because Harryhausen was learning under the masters of the 30s. And when he finally starts putting out these sci-fi horror movies in the late 40s and the 50s, we get this monster. And this monster, I think, is this movie it manages to be very much a classic Universal monster movie, but for the 50s. And I think that's perfect, because it does exist in its own time, and yet no one ever stops to think that Creature from the Black Lagoon is 30 years removed or 20 years removed from Dracula and from Frankenstein. He exists in that same world, and yet he's not really.
Exactly. It's a very different take, right? Because these others are actual humans or former humans that have been transformed in some way. Now, like you said, dawn of the atomic age, we start entering into this world of humanoid things. Right. It has two legs, but it is definitely not human. So I really enjoyed that. And just while we're here at the top, I mean, this movie is gorgeous.
Yes.
Holy shit, is this movie beautiful. The scenes where Kay is swimming at the surface of the water and Gilman is underneath her, like mimicking what she's doing.
Dude, it's almost pornographic. It's
I
like
was
and
that is
it's
almost exactly what I was about to say.
it's so sensual, right?
Yes.
And obviously there's no nudity. This is coming out in the 1950s, but it it is an act of intimacy that we're seeing, and it's filmed underwater, man, and it's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I was blown away. You know, like I've reached the point now where when I go back and watch something in black and white, I'm used to the fact that it looks good in HD because film quality was so amazing.
Yeah.
So now I start to look for those other things like, okay, look past the shiny facade and what do we have here? And what we ended up getting was those scenes. I mean, the whole thing is shot well, but
Mhm.
those underwater scenes are shot so dramatically and so perfectly. I found myself trying to find time today to research, you know, like when underwater photography would have like and filming would have been a thing. Because when you're watching this movie, the camera that he's using just to take stills is this massive thing that he's
Mhm.
having to carry around just to occasionally take stills. And we've got a film camera underwater shooting these things that are not only pretty, but so amazingly choreographed. So, you know, you kinda end up getting into looking into Rico Browning and stuff like that, and it's amazing that he
Yeah.
was able to pull this off, and this is stuff that's still amazing today. There are people who are TikTok famous for dancing underwater. Well, yeah, 70 years ago, there was a guy doing this on film and making history. So, I was amazed at how that just all of the underwater stuff was done, the stuff where they're coming straight at the camera,
Mhm.
the you know where they're drastically working with, you know, they kept calling them aqua lungs, which just cracked me
Yeah.
up. You know, they're scuba gear, they're just calling it aqua lungs, but the way that they're having to work with that stuff, the underwater fight, all of that stuff was
Yeah.
so pretty, and it's amazing to me as somebody who can hold their breath an average amount of time, I guess, but also is chunky around the middle and floats. It's amazing to me that people are like, fight choreography gets me anyway, but it's like you took it underwater, bravo.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to take anything away from the on paper director of this movie, Jack Arnold, because he is definitely not just an on paper director. Jack Arnold is a bona fide science fiction horror director for Universal. He did It Came from Outer Space, Tarantula, The Incredible Shrinking Man. Like these are standout 1950s sci-fi horror movies for Universal. But very much like Ray Harryhausen movies in the 50s and the 60s, there's your director, and then there's like who's in charge of the special effects and the second unit, and that was always Ray Harryhausen. He pretty much determined how the movie was going to look because he was doing all the shots that people were talking about. Riku Browning may not have been behind the camera, but he was directing and he
Right.
was choreographing everything, and his involvement in this movie and especially in the sequel, Revenge of the Creature from the Black Lagoon, is like so intimately tied to its success and how beautiful this thing looks. Like Browning was an artist who happened to dive, or was he a diver who happened to be an artist? Like I don't know, it gets so intertwined there, but there is a magic about this movie that is beyond what we're seeing. Like the technical aspects of this movie are just insane. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. And we can sit here and jerk off to this for an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm just gonna say we're gonna push forward
Sounds good.
because otherwise we're just gonna sit here and start saying, and what about this thing? And what about this other thing?
Good
So
call. Good call.
so in a section that we're calling scientifically horrifying, we talked about the fact that this story, this monster, this entire movie is not like the monster movies that come before it. So how does the story work for you? Is something that is based in pseudoscience but scientific nonetheless? Does this story work for you?
The reason that this story works so well is because this is a movie that you can sit back and look at as a whole, and you could have a legitimate argument about who is the antagonist here.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yes.
can watch this movie and you can be like, "Oh, well, yeah, that monster is trying to kill him." And then you take half a second and you go, "Well, he was just hanging around. Like that's just where he lives, right?
Yeah.
This is an invasion horror, right?
Yeah. In Florida, we call that stand your ground.
Exactly. This is Gilman saying, "Hey, no, I live here, and I'm, like, leave me alone. There's a
Yeah.
reason everything's here is pristine, and it's because it hasn't been touched by human hands." So I love the story here because it is very open-ended about who you choose to view as the aggressor here.
Yeah.
And you start to question those ideas of, as humans, as apex species, do we have some sort of manifest right to explore and take everything, right? There's the angle of, well, everything that's here on this planet was God put here for man, so we should be taking it. But then there's also the idea of, like you said, stand your ground. Gilman didn't go to your institute and start fucking with y'all.
Right.
You went and found him. And so there's a very good argument here that this story does an excellent job of showing both sides of, which is, do we end up with a 'twas beauty killed the beast type situation in this movie? And I loved that. When you and that's what always you come back to with these universal monsters. Every time we do one of these universal monsters or you watch one of these classics, there was an appreciation for things that were less than or more than human, depending on which way you're going with the monster. There was an appreciation for the fact that they have their own trials and tribulations. And if we would just leave them alone, everything would be fine. The human story that's found in this about whether or not this guy would have just been okay if we had just been like, you know what? That's his business. That is exactly what we end up seeing from the other side when we watch, Mars Attacks or something like that, a space invader movie. We are the space invaders in this movie. And I love that we get a bunch of different people kind of looking at it from different sides, but they never outright kind of make you feel like they're trying to pigeonhole you into believing one way or the other. And I did really, really like that about this story.
That is one of my favorite things about this story. This is basically, you said beauty killed the beast, and I was watching this with Link. Anytime I watch a movie for Shiver that isn't just like grossly inappropriate for him, we tend to watch these together. And he loves Universal monster movies. So when I told him that we were doing Creature from the Black Lagoon, he was like, "Oh, can I watch?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, of course you can watch." So he sat down, and like halfway through this movie, he turned to me and he was like, "Hey, this is King Kong, right?" And I said, "Yes." Yeah, it is. It's King Kong. And he was like, "But it's also Frankenstein, right?" I'm like, "Yes, it is also Frankenstein." Yeah, and it's and by the way, it's Dracula. It's all of them. I'm like, because when something works, you just do that thing.
Yeah.
And I've got no problem with a movie going back to basics and saying, we have a monster, but it's very possible that you can look at this monster and say, you're a monster on the outside, but there's context to this, right? And that aspect of the story of man is the aggressor, right? The Gilman did not ask for anyone to come to his home and invade his house and his people. Like, he is totally like, if you're looking at this as someone broke into my home and stole my shit,
Right.
or let's kind of take this a different place. Someone desecrated my family's grave. What are
Yeah.
you going to do? What are you going to do? You're immediately going to seek retribution, right? And that's exactly what's happening here. I would love, only because like I'm not usually this sort of guy who's like, yeah, make a prequel, make a sequel, make all this. But when it comes to Universal monsters, fuck man, give me everything. I would love to see a prequel that shows who that was to the Gill Man, because I'm assuming that it was a lover, but we don't know.
Right.
We have no idea. But definitely the way that the Gill Man approaches Kay lets us know that this is more than just a monster. And I don't think that it was supposed to be like, well, I guess you could see it this way. I think it was definitely suggested, a very strong suggestion that this thing is humanoid, but there is humanity in it, right? I mean, you look at it and it's like, no, it's a monster, but there is something in it that we are supposed to connect to and say, fuck, man, like he's defending his home, he's falling in love. Like that is something that should be protected. And we do have characters there. It's really great to see characters in here that are trying to defend him.
Yes.
Because it would have been very easy, I think, to take the King Kong approach, where it's like, no, it's it's a monster, and it's got to be stopped. But we have Richard Carlson's character David, who is like, his main concern is, how do we preserve this thing? Like, you may be seeing this as a as a meal ticket, but this is a scientific find, and we have to make sure that this is preserved. Even
Right.
if only for posterity, we have to make sure that this is preserved. And it's really, I think, because of the time that it was done. This is after World War II. We are no longer the same world, forget country, that we were before then. This more, I think, realistic approach to monsters makes this movie so much better. It's an added layer in there where it's like, hang on a second, let's consider something from this monster's point of view, from this other person's point of view, because it very well, imagine a Frankenstein, and we have gotten these sort of Frankenstein movies later where we sympathize more with the monster, which is always what Mary Shelley intended.
Which is
right?
which is what you're supposed to do. It
Yeah.
turns out Frankenstein is the monster.
Right. Yeah. Dr. Frankenstein. that is.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I loved that perspective. And yes, I do love that they gave us both David and Mark, because you're talking about the thing, somebody breaks in your home, desecrates your family's grave. The idea of then also one of those people wants you as a trophy to commemorate the fact that they did this to your lineage. And from what we see in this movie, the death of Gilman ends that line. So you start to one of the things that this movie does question is, what is the scientific thing here? Is it to bring this in to research it, or is it the right thing to do is to allow it to continue to live? What this movie does very well, it does very well between the lines.
Yeah.
And that makes a really good story. When you've got something where you can sit back and have these kinds of discussions, that's what makes a good story. I love the way that and like when he eventually blocks him in by putting the tree across the one way into the cove. Well, yeah, he from his perspective, if they leave, they come back, more men, more guns. Right. This is nobody gets out of here alive, because no one's supposed to know I'm here. And when you start to look at those things, those aren't aggressive things. Those are defensive maneuvers.
Yeah.
You don't allow a full retreat without taking without either killing or taking prisoners, because then they just come back stronger.
Yeah.
And we are never led to believe that Gilman is unintelligent. We are
No, not at all.
constantly reminded of the fact that this is not just some beast in the water. This is a smart, living, thinking thing. And then that whole concept that we always get in these is also, it seems like he loves, he appreciates beauty. He very easily could have just snagged Kay and dragged her under right there, but that's not what he did. He swam with her. He mimicked what he was doing. Like you said, it becomes this very erotic moment. And it's so weird to kind of see that, to think about that as an erotic moment, but also wrong to think about it as anything else. Right? You don't need for them to actually make out and have sex like in the shape of water to understand that this is sensual. And all credit to the people who were making and shooting that scene for how well that goes. What Universal always does so well in these movies is humanize these monsters and, like you said, make you wonder who's at fault here. Who is the bad guy? Sometimes they throw it right in your face, like the end of King Kong. Sometimes they just kind of leave it and they're like, figure it out yourself. It's not that hard. We drew all the dots and they're numbered sequentially. But it's up to you about whether or not you want to connect them. And that's what we got here. We did get the guiding hand of David pointing us in that direction, but you're allowed to sit and analyze this as it's going. And that was phenomenal.
Dude, you said it fucking perfectly. Like there's nothing else to add as far as like the story goes. The only thing I will add for stories about structure, the story structure here, there's such a fantastic buildup, like beautiful buildup to the horror.
Yeah.
Because the tension rises so incrementally that you almost don't even remember you're watching a horror movie.
Right.
And when the horror sets in because someone is murdered or someone is worse, like just totally destroyed, burned, to a crisp, then it sets in. You're like, oh shit, that was a scary moment. And it's very easy with today's horror, and it's not just today. I mean, it's been for a while now, to get caught up in the, oh well, that wasn't scary because it's not bloody or brutal or shocking or something like that. But the thing is that there's so much about horror that is atmospheric, and that's something that I think that this movie nails, because this does feel a lot, I think, like an adventure movie. It does feel a lot like a romance. It can be very much a thriller and an action movie at times, but that doesn't take away the fact that we're still watching a horror movie. And I think that it does such a good job of building that atmosphere, particularly if you have ever swam in a lake or a lagoon where you can't see 2 feet in front of you.
Right.
That is scary. And I've talked on the show before about how the house I grew up in was on a lake, and you cannot see more than 6 inches in front of you. And I used to swim in that lake. We would take kayaks out there. We'd hit baseballs into the lake, and we'd kayak out, go get the baseballs, and then come back and do it all over again. In the hottest days of the summer, we just kayak out there and jump into the water, and then just swim around. And I remember specifically, I may have told this story before, but I remember specifically fishing out on the lake and feeling like I've caught something big. And I'm like, that's very weird, because we don't catch big fish in these lakes. Like it's little canals that lead into this lake. And it was a half-eaten duck.
Oh.
And I was like, whoa, hang on a second. What is large enough?
Yeah, what in this lake is eating ducks?
Yeah. And so, I mean, in Florida, there's only 2 things that could have possibly taken it down. One may be only slightly worse than the other. One is a snapping turtle, which, although it's not going to kill you, could definitely take off a finger, take off a hand, a nose, your ball sack. Like it'll maul you, right?
Right.
And then the other's a gator. And I was like, you know what? How many times have I gone right by a fucking gator in this lake and not know it?
Yeah.
And it was the last time I swam in there. And that's the sort of horror that this thing builds, because when you see, like, there's so many layers to those scenes where we see Gilman swimming with Kay, because he sees her, he swims right up to her, she doesn't see him, he's like feet away from her, she doesn't see him, and he does nothing, right? And we think, okay, well, he's in love with her, or falling in love with her, he's intrigued by her at the very least, but he is very calculating for when he goes after the men.
Yes.
And he waits for the right moment to go after them. He waits for them to be separated. He waits for them to be vulnerable. And that's when he attacks. And you start thinking, what is in the water with me?
Yeah.
When I can't see, right? And it's that same fear that's explored in Jaws, in Lake Placid, to a degree in Piranha, that's a very real fear, that the fear of the unknown is always scary. It's the reason why we have these folk monsters that we're so afraid of, right? But also that thing exists not only on land, but also where we are most vulnerable, in the water. We can't breathe, we can't move. That's scary.
Yeah, man. When he's swimming around her and she's just kind of sitting there treading water, and he gets right up to her feet, and just the fin just barely brushes her ankle. And we've all been there in the water. You're like, oh, what was that? Then you immediately have to tell yourself, oh, it was nothing. It's just a weed or something. Because if you let that cycle of, oh God, what could it be, start, you panic in the middle of the water, and that's a bad place to panic.
Yeah.
But yeah, you talk about that tension, because and we talk about it being relatable. That is a moment everybody's had. It's what was that? I can't see. But she just kind of she pushes that out of her head, because it's just this pristine place. I do love that out of that what we got out of the people, even before the idea of we've got to kill it and bring it back. The reverence that they have for the Amazon, when they're on the boat at the very beginning and they're going through, they did a very good job of building the scientific wonder of what it was. Like I said earlier, there are times when you get into these adventure type movies where it becomes about people that are lesser thans because they haven't evolved as a society the way that we have. But they didn't have that. There was just an absolute awe of how all of this has been the same. They say since the beginning of time, it's always been this way. And I did love that the story sold all of that, and it sold it through a cast of characters that, we've got to get into. So in a section that we're calling faculty and staff, we've mentioned some names. We've talked about some of the people. Let's get a little bit deeper into the crew that we've got here in the Black Lagoon.
Okay. So, I've been thinking a lot about who I wanted to mention first, because we don't have a terribly large cast. But what we do have, like, literally everyone is stellar at their role. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about who I consider to be the real villain of this movie, Richard Denning as Mark Williams.
Absolutely.
Right? He is diabolical in this movie. There's really no other word that I can think of other than diabolical. And I almost cheer when he finally dies, because he's such a dick. He's such a dick. And the thing is, like, you don't realize it at first, but it also doesn't grow on you. It just hits you in the face. And you're like, oh, wait, that's the character that he is. Okay.
Exactly.
Got it. But he plays an important role. Without his role, the the movie doesn't happen, right? We need a financial backer.
Right.
And that guy is usually, as they often are in these sorts of horror movies, right? Like capitalism is the monster.
Yeah.
Money hungry individuals are the monster. What was the one that you posted a meme recently? Where it
Oh,
was like, oh yeah, capitalism was the
yeah,
monster.
yeah. The xeno, it's
The xenomorph.
based to think that the xenomorph is the villain in Aliens. The
Yeah.
enlightened view is that unchecked capitalism is the villain in the Alien franchise.
Every time a new Alien movie comes out, there's a whole new generation who's like, hey guys, did you see this thing? It's so woke because capitalism is the bad guy. I'm like, welcome to 1978, fucker.
Yeah, exactly.
Ridley Scott did it first.
Yeah, no, and it's Mark is, Mark is the guy that now, like you're saying, you realize he's the bad guy. Like, we need a movie where a character is named Elon Musk who does this, so that all of his sycophant assholes can be like, oh, wait a minute, he's the bad guy. Yeah. Being rich and taking credit for other people's shit doesn't make you an innovator. It makes you a bankroller at best. And that's all we get out of Mark. I mean, and David even says that. Says, he takes credit for a lot of things too.
Mm-hmm.
And like, as soon as he said that, I was like, ooh, skewered Elon Musk well before he was born. Right.
Yeah.
Like I felt that one. And I do love those moments when you're watching something like this and you go, man, this has always just been a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Where you've got these people who support one guy because he's got money and we're supposed to believe that he's what we should be living up to. And then you've got people who are making films like this that go, no, this is the bad guy. He did a stellar job with it. And like you said, you're not slowly sitting around going, maybe he's the bad guy. No, you're sitting there going, all right, this guy Marks, he's all right. And you're like, oh shit, fuck this guy. Like, and you're right. And it's just, it is that sudden punch. And it was so good.
And I'm so glad that the role was cast the way it was, because it's always really easy to tell the bad guy when the bad guy is like big and mean looking and ugly and he's got a scar and it's like, oh yeah, that's the bad guy, right? Like, this guy's a Greek god, like you look at him and like, it's like, I will never in a million years, I could hit the gym every fucking day and not look like this guy.
Especially because you can't chisel your jaw like that. That's genes. That's
impossible.
There is so much chiseled jaw in this movie. Like I'm kind of disappointed they both only punch each other once. I want to see what those jaws can take.
Hell yeah, man. And they weren't made of glass. That I can tell you, because you can sculpt glass nicely, but that was not a glass jaw there.
Yeah.
Like that, these were tough dudes that they cast in these old movies, and like somehow they were chiseled, like if out of marble, these guys. And so I love that this guy manages to be suave and debonair, like he's basically James Bond.
Right.
And yet we see that Kay wants nothing to do with this guy, because we see David like kind of like, oh, he's coming on to my girl,
Yeah.
And
I hope you're worried about me too, Kay.
Yeah. And she lets him know very, very to the point. It's like, I've only got eyes for you, man.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a really great job. Very easy, I think, as the villain character to want to humanize him and be like, oh, well, look at this aspect of him. Like, we can try to humanize him the same way they do with the monster. I love that to the very end, he was just a prick.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go the other way with it, not to just the other side of that coin. We'll get back to David. I got to go with the guy in this movie who was the Clint Howard of this era. And that's Nestor Paiva as the captain of the boat, as Captain Lucas.
He's so good.
He's just stellar, man. Mm-hmm. And he made you laugh, but he also, again, a vital part of pushing this thing forward. Without him, this movie doesn't happen. right? So he did serve as more than just comic relief, but I do think that we did get a lot of breadth of character in
Mhm.
him, because we see him cracking the jokes, and he's sitting around with this cigar and doing all that. But we also see him genuinely concerned for his people when they show up to the camp and that
Mhm.
tent has been destroyed. And we see him, he's the guy, he just wants out. He doesn't want any more bodies left in the wake. He doesn't care about this creature. He wants to go. He wants to see the people that he knows live. And the fact that he does go from this just jester of a character who seems like he's just there to bring some levity to this movie, into the guy who ends up becoming just kind of a level-headed middle ground. He's not obsessed with this creature in any stretch
No.
of the imagination. He doesn't care. He didn't even really want to come here. Just kind of wanted to prove that he could do it.
Mhm.
Right. And I loved that about him, but I also just I loved him just with his cigar, cracking jokes, getting the boat going. I do think that he was really necessary, because as we've talked about this movie, and as we continue to talk about characters, there is a lot of weight in this movie, and you
Mhm.
can just watch it and miss all of that. You can absolutely watch this and miss every bit of it. But once you get hooked into how heavy this movie is, it drags you in. And
Yeah.
so having a character like Captain Lucas is vital for a movie like this, just to occasionally remind you, like, okay, yeah, no, but we're still just people, and some people are just people still, and that's okay. And I did really enjoy him. And like I said, man, just Nestor Paiva, go, if I'm saying this name and you've seen this movie but never actually looked at who any of the actors are, go to this man's wiki, because he's credited with over 400 things. You didn't
Yeah.
make a movie in black and white without at least calling him and seeing if he wanted to show up. And it
He's
seems like,
kinda like the Dick Miller of his time.
there we go.
Yeah.
It
Where it's
seemed like
and
he
it was
did
always a
all of it.
small role,
Yep.
but man, it was fantastic. You need those sort of bit players, and we have to remember that this time in Hollywood was a totally different time. So, like, today, we have actors who make a movie for Paramount, and then they make a movie for Warner Brothers, and then they make a movie for, over here, over there. In those days, you had what we called the studio system. So you were a studio actor. And so when you were good at doing a specific thing and you were under contract with, say, Warner Brothers or Paramount or whatever, like, they knew to cast, okay, well, here are like the 5 guys that we've got that can do this role. See who is best for it. And then you had guys like Nestor Paiva, who were like just so good at everything. And
Yeah.
he literally could do everything. And so when you were Universal putting out like 100 movies a year, you got work nonstop.
Yeah.
If you were like Paiva, who was like, yeah, I'll do this, I'll do that, I can do this, I can do that. Why? Because I'm just a fucking actor. And
Yeah.
what I want to do is act. And he does such a great fucking job in this movie. He's so sure of himself. I don't know that any character in this entire movie, including Mark,
Mark.
is as sure of himself as Lucas, because Mark is talking shit about the boat. He's like, "Oh, couldn't Maya get something better?" Right? And then he comes out from the cabin and he says, who was it? Kay was started to say, like, "Oh, I think what he means." He goes, "No, I know exactly what he means." It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
why do I need anything more than this? It's like,
Yeah.
fuck, that's cool. That is so cool. Right? Like, that's the guy who pulls up in a beat up old pickup truck and is just sitting there and he's smoking a cigarette, and you're like, hey, do you see the new Ram I've got over here? It's like, but this 87 Chevy 1500 is gonna kick the shit out of that thing. Like,
Right.
that's the sort of like gravitas that he's got. And then there's one scene that I always forget about, And every time it comes up, I'm like, God, the balls on this fucking guy. When Mark is saying, no, we're gonna go out there and we're gonna find this thing. We're gonna, we're gonna take it to the research facility now. And he says, well, we'll wait, because he wants to, go and do his research or whatever. And he says, no, we're going to leave now. Like I own this boat, or you, or whatever. And he pulls out the knife and he's like,
Yeah.
Are you sure that you want to leave now? It's so calm, cool, and collected. I don't know that there's a lot of people that could have done that, because Mark's a tall, imposing character. And Lucas, although he's a big dude, is not big in that way.
Right.
So like that takes fucking surety of yourself. And it's such a fantastic job he does with that role. I'm so glad that you mentioned him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Damn. Okay, we got to talk about Julie Adams, man. Number one, bombshell,
100%.
like, few are the women that are this beautiful. And if you find pictures of her like later in life, like there is just a stunning quality to her, like that's a beauty that comes about like once in a blue moon. And somehow Hollywood was able to find these women, and not only did they look as beautiful as her, but like she can act, man, because she does a really good job of not being the damsel in distress. I
Right.
never once got damsel in distress from her. It's really easy to do. I think what Faye Dunaway does in King Kong, and be the damsel in distress. It's what the role called for, right? And at this point, we're 21 years removed from King Kong. We've advanced a little bit as a society, and that's not what we want. We don't want the damsel in distress. We want a strong woman who is going to be able to command the screen and command characters. And she goes toe to toe with everyone there. And there's this fantastic moment where she's kind of fluffing the ego of David, and it's like, yeah, he's so brilliant and he's fantastic. And who is it? It's Maya who tells her, he's like, yeah, but I hear a lot, and I'm pretty sure that he's gotten a lot of research funded specifically because of you.
Right.
And it's kind of that role where it's like, oh yeah. I'm kind of like deferential, so that, because he's doing this important research, and he's the guy you came here for. And he's like, no, but you need to understand, you are important, and you're important not just to him on a personal level, on a professional level. He owes a lot to you. Like, that's really important to put that out there, because in real life, characters like that, people like that exist all the time, where it's the neck that turns the head, as they say in My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right? The man is the husband is the head, but the wife is the neck that turns the head in the direction. And that's very much Kay's character. She never ever fears that something is going to happen to her. She's just like, she's ready to go out there, and she's not afraid of anything. And so graceful. Everything that she does is with this like almost regal grace. I felt like I was watching a princess do every single little movement. It was so perfect, and so calculated, without feeling like it was straining on her, like it was exhausting to do this thing. Like, I don't know if you understand that. Like, I can't dance. I'm an awful dancer. So for me to dance, it costs every bit of energy that I have. And in the end, like, I'm done with like one dance, and I'm like, man, that was awesome. And they're like, yeah, okay, so are you ready to do like the next one? I'm like,
No, I'm good.
I'm
good.
done. I'm done. I'm tapped out. I got nothing left. Nothing seemed to exhaust her. Like, she always was just like ready for the next thing, and it didn't weigh on her. It wasn't taxing. I don't know. There's such a grace to her. like beyond the beauty, like there's something in her where it's like, yeah, I can handle anything you throw at me.
Yeah, I love when she decides to go swimming and all the men are, below deck or whatever, and she's just like, "Well, to
Mhm.
hell with this," down to the bathing suit, into the water. And we get those scenes that we were talking about, but then she's just sitting there and they all realize that she's out there swimming. And so this boat full of men immediately start chastising her about how ridiculous this decision was. Never mind the fact that two of them were just in the same water just wearing a pair of shorts,
Right.
right? They lean into her, and there's no like, oh yeah, no, come save me. She's just like, okay, whatever, and climbs back on the boat. Like, wanted to go swimming, went swimming.
Mhm.
And there is something to be said about that. I mean, for a movie that was made in the 50s, right? To present this type of role, because you're right, this was far removed from King Kong and
Right.
from that actress who just existed to be eye candy and to be a MacGuffin
Mhm.
to cause what was going to happen going forward. What we got out of Kay was a lot like what we got from Captain Lucas, but the emotional side of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
She was an emotional kind of like a grounding point for Mark. Whenever, I mean, for David,
Yeah.
when David wanted to get so upset with Mark about running his mouth, I mean, she was his constant. She was, and that role, while not necessarily having the, not power in the sense of an Angelina Jolie who's like, I can fight like guys, and we get some
Right.
great movies out of that. There's a lot of power in that. Then, like you said, being the neck that turns the head. But it was also never presented as a type of thing where she was doing it deceptively because she wanted to be the puppet master. She was doing it because she genuinely cared for this guy, and he needed that. And it ended up with her doing all of these things in such an understated way that the movie's over before you realize how much she brought to it and
Yeah.
how much she mattered to everything that was going forward. And I mean, like you said at the top, what sticks out about this movie. And when you go back and you look at that poster, man, that poster of Julia Adams being carried by the creature, I mean, and it is just, it's hand drawn, but you're pulled in, and there's such a dichotomy there between the grotesque that we get out of Gilman and the beauty that she brought to that it'd be easy to go into this movie expecting her to be Faye Dunaway. So for it
Right.
to come out of left field, for her to be every bit as important as every swinging dick in this movie, that's a big deal. And I did really, really like that. So I'll finish this up here with obviously we've got to talk about David. We keep
Yeah.
mentioning him as part of everyone else's story, but there is a very good story of David here. And I think that one of the things that is portrayed not necessarily through the script and the words that are spoken in this movie, but through the acting that we get from Richard Carlson is something that is highly relatable, especially to people in our generation who have been in their profession for however long. He gives off this energy of an imposter syndrome where
Yeah.
he needs to feel validated in what he's doing because he's not the guy with the money. In this particular instance, he's not the guy who found the claw that led to this. He needs to do something that stakes his claim in this. And so there's this, I don't know that fragility is the right word, but there's this real understated unsuredness in himself.
Mhm.
But he doesn't go about trying to prove that he's as an important piece of this as everyone else by just beating his chest and demanding that everything get done his way. What we get out of him is a very logical approach to doing all of these things. He's the one who's like, okay, yeah, let's stun it and then I'll pull it up, and he's constantly in and out of the boat. He's also tip of the spear in this movie. I mean, this man is in the water first, out of the water last, constantly. So it's never presented as like a machismo or bravado. It is very much just this is what I came here to do, and God damn it, I'm going to be the best at it. And I love that it's given to us in that way without ever him having to say those words. Richard Carlson, whose shoulders are just as broad as Richard Denning's, whose jaw is just as chiseled, never has to do the silverback gorilla thing to prove that he's every bit as much of the man. He does it through subtle actions, which I think makes their dynamic even more cool. These two guys, I don't know anything about their personal lives, but they definitely seem to understand exactly what the other was bringing to the table with their character, and everything they did was a perfect counterpoint to the other, that they end up just being this massive beast of two sides of the same coin.
They do. And what I love the point that you made about him not having to like beat his chest to be just as big as Mark. It's something that everyone notices about him too.
Yeah.
Like there's no question that he is the man, and he manages to be the man without having the funds to back it up like Mark does. And Lucas immediately defaults to him as the leader here, and yet he technically answers to Maia, and yet even Maia defaults to him too. He's like, no, I went to him for a reason, there is such a strength in him, even with his vulnerability.
Vulnerability. There's the fucking word I was looking for. Thank you.
I thought that was the word you were looking for, and it was the one that came to mind. I'm like, oh shit, vulnerability. That's what he shows there, is like he's human. He is in a lot of ways what I think the Gill Man wishes he could be.
Right.
Because he is able to be in control of himself in his own environment and in the other environment, which I think is what the Gill Man wants. I think the Gill Man wants to be able to be in those two environments, because the Gill Man is split between the water and the land, but ultimately has to go back to the water with the different apparatuses that he's got, like the aqualung, like the underwater camera. He's master not just of land, but he's master of the sea too. And that's what I think Gill Man wants. And that's represented through Kay.
Yeah.
Which ultimately, like, that's what it ends up being, is like the fight to save Kay, although it's not really about Kay. And this movie was never going to pass the Bechdel test.
Right.
But I think that's really where like it starts to fall apart, is it's like, in the end, yeah, she's someone who needs to be saved, but she serves many more purposes in this story than just the plot device of someone that needs to be saved. And we see a lot of that humanity in David because of that performance, because of the fact that everyone is able to be deferential to him. And it's like, yeah, you're the man. So much so that I'm going to put this knife up to this guy's throat, who's paying me to do what he says, because you're saying you got to stay here and do your studies. And that is power. That is real power. And it's an amazing performance that he gives. I'm so glad that's where we ended up on.
Yeah. So there's one more, and we've been doing this for the entire year of the monster. So it's time for It Came from the Deep. and we've got to talk about Gilman now, right? The movie's called Creature from the Black Lagoon. Let's talk about the creature from the Black Lagoon. Before I throw it to you, I do want to point out that now 4 movies into doing this month, this is the first one we've done that is humanoid and is actually an actor portraying the monster. So we've got a lot to work with here. So tell me about Gilman.
Listen, it's iconic for a reason. And I know that a lot of times it's easy to just be like, oh, well, yeah, like it's Frankenstein or it's Dracula. It's like, oh yeah, it's just it's part of the the cultural zeitgeist because of how important it was in its time. All of that is true, but I think that to not give Gilman his due because he's just another universal monster is to, number one, be incredibly nearsighted.
Right.
Like you have to be able to look at everything that this monster represents, how complex a creature it is, the thematic elements that go into like what's going on here with storytelling and how they use Gilman as a monster to tell a really interesting story about, it's so layered. And we've gone into it, so I'm not going to continue to go into that. But then you have that really interesting element where it's like, this is not an animatronic. This is not CGI. There's a dude in there.
Yeah.
And that dude is able to portray a monster with desire, a monster with a past, a monster who hopes to have a future. It's fucking crazy, man. That's fucking crazy. He does it with the way he moves his hands, how quickly he moves towards or away someone's wrist, someone's ankle. He does it with the movements that he makes. He's able to be skittish and yet imposing all at the same time. What Riku Browning did for the Gilman is on the same level as what Boris Karloff did for Frankenstein, what Bela Lugosi did for Dracula, what Lon Chaney Jr. did for Wolfman. Like, it is on that level. And I think that if anyone says that because he was wearing a mask and we don't see his eyes, that it's not there, I think you're just flat out wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I think that what we get, it's you use the word iconic, and I think that that's the perfect word. It's also a word that is lexiconically just used too often, but it is absolutely perfect in this situation. And I think that we oft forget that he is such a vital part of this because he never got his own breakfast cereal. Right. So we so we forget that he was an important part of this Universal Monster empire that was built. But it's definitely one that when you see it, you go, oh, that's the creature from the Black Lagoon. You may not know he's called Gilman. You may have never seen it, but you see this monster and you know exactly what it is. You may see, you can just see a piranha or a crocodile or a shark. Those things exist, and it could just be any of them. No, not when you see Gilman. That is Creature from the Black Lagoon. And what we get here is every bit as important, like you said, as all of those others. The costume itself is so damn cool.
Thank you.
It is fucking incredible, right? We've got the webbed hands and feet, the huge claws. If you're watching us live, I mean, you're catching the highlights of this behind us. Those eyes, you mentioned, it can't be as good because you're not seeing his actual eyes. Seeing these eyes, the ones that are attached to this mask, because Riku Browning did such an excellent job physically acting out this role, seeing these eyes tells as much of that story. This becomes about the physicality of carrying this monster. When you were talking earlier about how smart he is when it comes to approaching the men, and he waits for them to be alone. Those scenes where he's just kind of down at the bottom and he's in the seaweed and you're just kind of barely catching the face, but the way his eyes are darting from side to side and he's tracking exactly where each one is, plotting his next move. Those are the types of things that lend an intelligence to this monster that we don't get that much. There is a lot to this, but ultimately, I mean, when you're looking just this is how you create something that stands the test of time. This is something that people still 70 years later still cosplay as. This is a costume you can still pick up every Halloween. It is not hard to get your hands on a Gillman creature from the Black Lagoon costume because this is iconic. This type of monster, this type of costume is the reason that we use that word. And look, if you saw this thing climb on your boat, you would shit yourself.
You would lose your fucking mind.
Full stop. There's no, oh, well, I would just get it. No, you would stand still and you would scream. Something we didn't even mention about how amazing Kay is. That scream that Julia Adams brings to this. You would stand there and you would scream and you would shit. And then maybe you would flail into the water. But there's nobody in their right mind who would genuinely try to stand toe to toe with this thing. This is scary. Strictly visually, this is one of the scariest universal monsters. You look at Dracula, and because of what is brought to Dracula, it's supposed to be kind of sensual. You know, we get those eyes because that's part of the story. Frankenstein's monster is horrifying because of the way that he's put together. But you take a kid who doesn't know who either one of these is and you show them Gillman and Frankenstein side by side, I promise you the one they're going to blame for nightmares just based on a picture is Gillman. So for anyone who wants to come at this movie and say that we dropped the ball on this one, this one's not horror, this movie's not scary, get over your fucking self. This thing is scary.
Yeah.
And it is. And he doesn't need to grotesquely murder somebody on camera. You know why? Because getting your ass handed to you by this thing in a fist fight is just as scary as a werewolf ripping you open at the guts. Also, this thing can rip you open at the guts. Look at his goddamn claws.
Yeah.
Gillman is so cool. And I'm so happy that I have now gone back and watched this because going into this movie, the only thing I had was that image of what he looks like. So, 34 years later, that was what stood the test of time. And now, yes, I've sat here for almost 70 minutes and broke this down with you, and I'll always have all of this. But if a 7-year-old can see this and 34 years later turn it on and that's what you remembered, then something was established and something was done perfectly with this monster.
And to give credit where it is undoubtedly due, the monster was designed by an animator and makeup artist that was not the same person who designed all the older Universal monster makeup effects, right? That guy's name was Jack Pierce, and he was legendary. And all of the stuff that he did was equally as legendary as he was. But this was a different time, and Jack Pierce, I'm pretty sure, had retired by this time. This was designed by someone named Millicent Patrick, and she was a Disney animator in the 40s. She designed Chernabog for Fantasia. Right?
Nice.
So for those of you who are thinking like, okay, what is that? The giant demon that comes out of the mountain at the end of Fantasia, where all of these ghosts are swirling around in this symphony of ghostly, enterprise happening around this demon that's controlling everyone. You're like, fuck, that's horror. That
Yeah.
is horror, right? And there's a lot in Disney that definitely, I mean, forget flirts with horror, that straight up is horror, because watch Snow White and tell me that that's not a horror movie. All right? It certainly is. That is who Jack Arnold went to be like, "Hey, we need to design a monster. You want to do this for me?" And Millicent Patrick designed, I think, one of the most iconic looking monsters of all time.
Absolutely.
Because as far as look goes, everything that you said about it, 100%. But who else in the pantheon of movie monsters is as iconic as Gilman? I
Right.
can only think of Universal monsters. And like you said, when it comes down to it, which is the scarier looking monster? For me, it's always going to be Gilman. And this was one of the reasons why, as a child, I was so drawn to this, because he was scary. He was scary, but he was human, right? Because like Jaws, there was a disconnect there. It was a
Yeah.
wild animal. It was a wild animal, and it was a real animal, right? So there was that layer to the horror where it's like, okay, but as long as I don't see a shark, I'm fine. But I can't see in the Black Lagoon. And what if that thing is in there? What if somewhere there is something like this? Like, that's terrifying. It's horrifying. Millicent Patrick was, I think, we don't talk about the special effects artists as artists enough.
Right.
And and it's really easy to go to, your Stan Winstons and your Carlo Rambaldis and your we talked about Ray Harryhausen a lot on this episode. Like, it's really easy to go to these guys and be like, yeah, man, they revolutionized special effects with stop motion and with animatronics and with all of this, but they are artists because they shaped our nightmares, man.
Yeah.
And to be able to give a grown man nightmares, that's something that not many people can do.
Yeah. So, I mean, there it is. That is a full of a breakdown as you were going to get about Creature from the Black Lagoon. So there's only one thing left to do, and it's time to rate this movie. So as we always do, quick reminder, we do not rate movies against other movies here at Shiver. Wouldn't be fair to any of the movies involved. So we don't use stars. We create a unique rating system for every movie. We're just looking at what this one tried to bring us and how successfully it pulled that off. So for this particular movie, Dave, out of a possible 5 unlikely ichthyologists,
Ooh, I love it. That's
what
so good.
what do you give Creature from the Black Lagoon?
It's 6. This movie's perfect. It's one of the most amazing horror movies, most amazing any movie ever made. It might make my top 20 favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, look, we've spent all this time talking about it. Everybody who's made it this far knew where we were going. This is absolutely 6 out of 5. Unlikely ichthyologist. There is zero. There is not a second of this movie that should ever be changed. And for if you're listening now and you were listening last week and we did Piranha and you're saying, wow, this is why we create unique rating systems. Because
you can't compare.
Because Piranha and Creature from the Black Lagoon should not be compared because they're both perfect for what they chose to bring us.
Yeah.
This movie is, however, that special level of perfect. It has stood the test of time. Like I said, we are sitting here 50 years later, or 70 years later, excuse me, still singing its praises, still talking about everything that this movie did for our childhood, generations before us and their childhoods. And now you're sharing it with your son so we can continue to push that forward.
Exactly.
There's a reason that current movies just constantly go to the well and be like, man, what haven't we done in a while? Leave this one alone. If we could just leave this one alone, because they're gonna CGI do riffs on it, like when we did the movie where the girl was stuck on the island, right? There's a
right
riff on that one,
yeah
right? Yeah, it's a riff
or take it and run with it, like Guillermo del Toro did with The Shape of Water, where it started out as a remake of this movie and ended up being a retelling of the tale, but not attempting to do what Creature from the Black Lagoon did.
Right.
It was truly a romance and a horror at the same time, of course, because it's Del Toro. But we don't need a remake of this. We didn't need Shape of Water. And I love Shape of Water. It was my favorite movie that year when it won Best Picture. I upset a lot of people by saying that it definitely deserved a Best Picture, but fuck, leave this movie alone.
Yeah. So there you have it. Unanimous 6 out of 5 for unlikely ichthyologist for Creature from the Black Lagoon. This one has been a lot of fun to break down, and it came from the deep month. I mean, really, I think this has been one of the
most solid month, I think.
Yeah, this one has been really good. We hit you with a lot of different stuff, but August is coming to an end, and September is about to begin. So we will be switching gears next week, and we are going from Dave's a cup of tea here with Black and White and Universal, and we're going to get into a full month of that shit that just makes me tingle. We're going to be doing folk monsters next month. And we are not only excited because there's a bunch of great stuff out there, we're going to be bringing you 3 movies that neither one of us have ever seen. So whereas, yes, a lot of times through Year of the Monster, we've used this as an opportunity to hit those movies that we've been meaning to do, and we've got a lot of high ratings. We don't know what's coming for the next 3 weeks. Right now, we literally have titles and kind of what it's about. Make sure you head to shiverpod.com where you can find links to all our social media. That's where you'll find out exactly what we are going to be doing. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. All of those places at ShiverPod. You can watch us live at most of those places, Wednesdays at 9, 8 Central. If you are listening to us somewhere where you get your podcast, 5-star review and a 5-star review and a quick little mention would do us wonders. Thank you to everybody who has gone out of their way to do that already. We love to hear from all of you.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, fright you very